Welcome to Leverage Women Podcast, where we equip, inspire, and connect women in the leadership that God has called them to. Here we are on Leverage Podcast, and I have with me Jaclyn Weidner. You're my good friend. I'm so happy that we're doing this.
Hi, Anne. I'm excited to be here.
And we are going to be talking about self-care as a leader and how we self-educate. So let's start first with the self-care part. How do you take care of yourself? You do this really well, my friend. I have to tell you, I admire this so much because I need this wisdom in my life. We feel like we're running like a marathon some days, or some days we're sprinting. But how do you take care of yourself, the mind, body, soul?
Okay. Well, I love that you said that, mind, body, soul, because I think it's easy for us just to think of self-care sometimes as just our body, right? Mm-hmm. And this idea of, okay, I need to sleep, I need to rest, and those things are so good. But how do we really take care of us as a complete person? And so really a lot of how I have learned this is just coming from the worst version of myself, or that version of myself. And actually my husband, he's in full-time ministry, both of us having a lot of times of burnout, exhaustion, and feeling like there's got to be a different way. And so I've just been on, I would say, this journey of learning, how do I actually prioritize rest and not feel like rest. And I would include for myself, rest is both the taking care of my body. So saying I'm actually planning for times that are downtime. So I'm going to put it in my schedule. This is a time where it's a priority for me to either be having a nap or just enjoying time and space with my family. But also, how do I put into my calendar the priority of connecting with God? And I actually think that's something that even as a leader who can spend time connecting people with God, so planning messages and Bible studies and things, it's easy to just have our study time or our God time be for the sole purpose of then pouring out. And we really need to have that time just for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be really just pouring from an empty cup and kind of getting that little bit of a refill. But we will probably be operating out of a place that is really weary. And I see a lot of really weary leaders around me. And not because they're not bad people. They're serving and caring for so many people. But it is that idea of how do I rethink a few things? So for me personally, I mean, a lot of my job is being a stay-at-home mom. I work part-time as a high school teacher and do some writing and speaking and other things. But I really have had to say, in my schedule, I'm going to work smarter, not harder. I'm going to figure out how do there's things I can do with my kids. Let's just say, for example, grocery shopping. Well, if I have some kid-free time, then I'm not going to use that kid-free time to go do errands or buy groceries. I'm actually going to use that time to go for a walk, to connect with God, and do things that sometimes don't appear to be productive. But this time is actually going to be the thing that is going to fuel me so that I can operate throughout my week from a place of rest. And I'm actually going to be way more productive in the end. So I don't know if that answers your question. It was long-winded.
It is awesome. I knew you should be here. This is so cool. So whether we're like single or married or whatever life may hold, the thing I'm hearing you say is there's just some practical things that we have to put into place into our schedule. You're extremely intentional with your time.
Right. And I think I actually will find myself getting in trouble and becoming exhausted when I give up those things. So I give up that space. And more recently, I actually had this happen to me where I have built into my schedule some kid-free time. My youngest daughter is at preschool. And so that's just been a great window for me to have downtime, connect with God, do some writing things. And more recently, I decided I'm going to use that time to pick up some extra shifts at work. And so that's a great reason. That making money, great. However, I learned in that I was giving up the time that I would spend exercising which is valuable to my health, that time I would spend just out in nature, connecting with God. And so I realized I need to be able to, if I'm taking that time away, I need to reinsert it somewhere else. So I need to make sure that I have a babysitter lined up for the afternoon so I can also go jog or something like that, something that's going to work. And I think part of it is it's being intentional. It's also being creative. So trying to figure out what is actually going to work in this season, in my schedule, and how do I first, this is the tricky thing, how do I first prioritize the things that are going to help me and my family thrive? So prioritizing time with God, prioritizing time with my spouse and my kids. There's a lot of, I kind of think about it sometimes as we will deal with all of those urgent things in front of us, right? Like I have to, as soon as I do this thing, then I can get to the important thing. As soon as I do this thing. And what we often can find is that we actually never get to the important thing because we're always just managing those urgent things that come our way. So what I've really tried to do is put the important things into my schedule. The urgent things will always get done.
So I love the fact that you are really intentional with your time and you're planning it out. It's in your calendar. I heard this, I read a blog recently, a Carrie Newhoff blog, that said that leaders make the worst friends because they're so busy and then they never have time for their friends, and it goes on. It's quite fascinating. We'll probably put the link in this at the end of the podcast. But what would you say to that? Because you are very intentional with your time and you are an amazing friend.
I hope so.
Yes, you
Talk
are.
to my friends.
Yeah.
No, I can totally see that. Because again, I think leaders often are very focused and strategic, and they have vision. So you know where you want to go. And it's very easy to then decide that other things are less important or frivolous. And sometimes friendship or fun can be considered that. And so, again, this is very similar to understanding and almost switching your mindset to say, okay, rest is productive, but investing in fun and friendships and community, like those things are also, I don't know if you want to use the word productive, but life-giving. They're important to, again, that whole like body, soul, and spirit, wholehearted living. And again, I think we just need to put those in the calendar. And you might be a leader and be like, I feel so busy. I just don't have time to connect with my friends. Well, you might have to plan a coffee date 6 weeks out, and it feels a bit silly sometimes because it's so far away. But that 6 weeks will come and you go, oh, I'm so glad I put it in my calendar. And then I need to prioritize keeping it. Even though there are a million other things we need to do, those million other things will get done, or maybe they didn't need to get done. I think that sometimes part of being a leader is how do we delegate well? And how do we also realize some things maybe we have put some really high expectations onto something that we don't need to do every single thing that we have hoped to do within our vision, letting go of some of those things.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think that you give yourself permission, right, to do that. Now, both of us have teaching background, and there are days in a teacher's schedule that are almost dictated to us. They are mandatory in most school districts and coined the term professional development. And then it is up to us as teachers to spend that time not marking papers or doing schoolwork, but to actually go and seek professional development. And I've kind of brought that into my role as a leader in a local church to develop myself professionally. And how have you done that? How have you self-educated to gain skills or explore your interests? You say you're a writer, speaker, that kind of thing. What have you done?
Well, I've done a few different things. I definitely think investing in yourself is key to try, and often we do these things because we're trying to get somewhere. So we go to secondary education. post-secondary education. We're trying to get a degree or some sort of qualification. So we're used to kind of investing there. And I think if we can view it similarly, like we're investing ourselves because we're trying to gain more knowledge. And so I've done things like various groups, so Facebook groups or online courses, so things that are paid for. So a course on speaking, a course on writing. I've gone to various conferences, just women's conferences, and they sometimes are just conferences just to care for myself. One of the things that I like to think about my relationship with God is that it's kind of like that in my marriage relationship. And so if I want my relationship with God to thrive, then we're going to talk daily. We are going to connect more intentionally weekly, so like a date night. And then we're going to try and go away seasonally. And so that's how I view my relationship with God as well. We're talking daily. I'm going to try and have a time to connect with God weekly that's a little more intentional, and then go away seasonally. So some of those conferences, that's just what it is. It's me saying, okay, God, I want to connect with you. But some of those might be more intentional in terms of learning more writing skills or learning more marketing skills and things like that. And I think as a leader, really one of the things we're trying to do is just become really excellent communicators. We're communicating this incredible message, and so we want to be incredible at learning how to communicate, especially in this world that is actually, we are communicating differently than we ever have. We're taking information very quickly and in different ways. And so I think as people who want to communicate this message really well and really clearly, we need to continue to educate ourselves on how is the world communicating and how can we stay on top of that, and not in a striving way, but just in a way where we can be really clear and really meet people where they're at.
That's amazing. And so, what are some of the topics that you are passionate about in writing?
Yeah. One of the things that I love talking about, I think primarily, is this idea of soul care. And so, very similar to what we started off talking about, not as much just self care, but how do I really take care of what's going on in my heart and my mind? And I think, similar to how I just shared, we are engaging in communication and information so differently than we ever have in the past. We have so much input. And so I think what I love to talk to people about is some of that output. So, how do we actually sit with God? How do we create that space to deal with what's going on in our head, in our heart? And how do we also set up some things that are going to be wise for us? So, how do we actually really practically guard our heart, guard our mind? And, it might be some things like, okay, what are we watching on Netflix, or what are we consuming music wise? But it also might mean just saying, hey, I'm not going to read the comments here, or I'm not going to be scrolling on social media. Other things that we don't maybe realize that we are sort of passively feeding ourselves, and that can be really creating fear. It can be creating a sense of negativity or anxiety. And so, how do we really practically do things to guard our heart and guard our mind? And how do we be really diligent in that? And so, yeah, I love just chatting a little bit about that idea of input, output when it comes to soul care. Also, when it comes to just really dealing with some of the junk that may have been hanging out there for a long time. So I like to talk about it like decluttering our soul. So how do we take some time with God, sit there and say, hey, this thing may have been hidden or buried for a long time. How do we finally let go of it? So that's one of the things I'm the most passionate to talk about.
What would you say to the leader who has been leading for a long time? They are a veteran leader, just wanting, like, kind of having an itch, wanting to learn something new and develop themselves. Where would they start? What are some practical things that they could do?
Well, I love kind of what you're saying, is that idea of if you have something that is kind of sparking for you, so a little something that you're interested in, don't feel like you have to be an expert right away. So be okay to be a beginner. I started on this writing journey, I'd say about 2 years ago, and I'd never written anything before then. And so I didn't show my work to a lot of people. I just sat down at Starbucks and started writing, and I really enjoyed that process. And same thing as I started up a podcast. It was very small, and I just said, you know what? It's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay to be a beginner. It's okay to learn technology. There's a few times I've spent time looking things up on Google or YouTube for a very long time, trying to figure out the answer. And I've found that I've really enjoyed a lot of things I had no idea I would enjoy, expressing myself creatively in these different ways and sharing these messages with people. I just sort of followed, I didn't know, there's no way I could have known 2 years ago all that I am doing now, but I really just started following these very little nudges from God saying, okay, why don't you try this? Why don't you write about this? Why don't you contact that person? Somebody has asked you to do something. Why don't you just try saying yes? And so for me along this journey, it hasn't been like, I think at the beginning, I knew God was calling me to write and to speak. And for a while I sat around and I thought, well, someone's probably just going to call me, right? Like they're just going to have my number and say, hey, I've got this big platform for you. And I think I had to realize that there was a lot more to be said for just following the little nudges of God, and that it's actually in some ways less about this doing this big thing for God as much as it is just being obedient in those little moments and having my heart be deeply connected to Him and deeply satisfied in Him, and all of those other things just begin to fall into place.
It is so awesome to have you
Thank
here
you.
today. Thank you for making the time
Yeah.
and coming out and being on this podcast. All the resources that we have spoken about, we're going to share in the link below. And thank you again, Jaclyn, for coming out. Thank you for listening.